You know, we talk about James Pearce and Nico Iamaleava literally every day. It's always James Pearce, Nico, James Pearce, Nico. How good are those two guys compared to the rest at their positions in the SEC and the country in college football? We're going to talk a lot of Nico and James Pearce, plus Tennessee's chances in the college football playoff, that and so much more. It's your Wednesday Locked On Vols.
You are Locked On Vols, your daily podcast on the Tennessee Volunteers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, good Wednesday morning, everybody. Welcome into Locked On Vols. I am Eric Kane. We are a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every single day. Thanks so much for being here, making Locked On Vols your first listen, your first watch each and every single day. Shout out to Locked On College Football. I made an appearance on that show yesterday, so make that your second listen. Or Locked On SEC. Make that your second listen when we're done here on Locked On Vols. Got a big show coming up today. Dalton Wasserman from Pro Football Focus is going to join the show, and he's got a lot of great things to say about Nico, James Pearce, some other NFL draft prospects on this team, where these guys rank amongst their peers at their same positions. A lot of good stuff in segments 1 and 2 from Dalton Wasserman and Pro Football Focus on some of the elites on Tennessee's roster. You don't want to miss that, coming up in a matter of seconds. And then the Athletics Freaks list from Bruce Feldman came out the other day. 2 Tennessee Volunteers made the cut. 1 Carson Newman Eagle. Going to give a shout out to the Carson Newman Eagles. Made the list as well. That's coming up in segment number 3. Today's episode is brought to you in part by Gametime. You can download the Gametime app, create an account, put in the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Thank you so much for watching us. You can listen to us, watch us, download us, all that for free wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, the Locked On Vols on the YouTube channel. I am Eric Kane at _Kaner and at Locked On Vols. All right, that's out of the way. Let's get into it. Great conversation right now happening with Dalton Wasserman from Pro Football Focus. Give it a listen. Here's part 1 of my conversation with the PFF expert. Dalton, you look at Tennessee ahead of the 2024 campaign, and there's some college football playoff talk. There's some college football playoff hopes and aspirations. Kind of where do you see Tennessee in the pecking order of the new look SEC entering this fall?
They're going to be a borderline playoff team, depending on if they can win some of their bigger games. And I think, the main story this year, obviously, is going to be the development of Nico Iamaleava at quarterback, right? We saw him. He was spectacular in one start against an excellent defense in Iowa in the bowl game last year. That's really what it's going to be about, right? We know this is going to be a high-flying, explosive offense if he can develop right. And honestly, when I look at him, I think he's the perfect quarterback for Josh Heupel's offense, right? When you just talk about from a tools standpoint, there's not many quarterbacks in the country that can match him. Big arm, big-time mobility, and just clearly anytime he's been on a football field, he's been the best athlete out there, right? And I think he takes full advantage of that. I think as long as he develops the timing and just gets a grasp of the concepts of this offense, their offense could have a big year and carry them maybe as far as the playoff.
When you look back at his quarterback class a couple of cycles ago, I mean, there was a lot of good players in that class, including Arch Manning and some others, Jaden Rashada and Malachi Moore and so on and so forth. Did you like Nico? Where did you like Nico in that grouping then? And then obviously now, a lot to be determined. I mean, Nico's about to start his second game here, the season opener. But where do you think all those guys kind of are now a couple years later?
I think he could be the best one out of all of them, right? I mean, Rashada obviously going to Georgia now. He's got some time to sit back and develop. Malachi Nelson is very, very interesting now, going up to Boise State from USC after sitting behind Caleb Williams for a year. And even Jackson Arnold, I believe, was in that class at Oak, is in the same spot as Iamaleava now. He had one start last year. He looked decent, and we're going to see where Oklahoma goes with that. But I think he could certainly be the best of all of them. You look at his physical tools, I think they're the best of any of those guys you mentioned. Between the frame and the arm strength and the mobility, he could really take off. And I think he went to the most explosive offense out of all of them. When you take Jackson Arnold at Oklahoma, they're in a little bit of a retooling kind of year in the first year in the SEC, right? Or a guy like Malachi Nelson, who is kind of figuring himself out, right? After he was expected to take over for Caleb Williams when they recruited him, and USC obviously isn't going in that direction. It looks like they're going with Miller Moss, but Iamaleava is the one guy who's really had a year to just settle in an offense that he should be comfortable with. And again, we saw how good he was in the bowl game. I think with his physical tools, he could be the best one out of all of them.
Yeah, that was Dante Moore, Malachi Nelson. I combined two of those names there. Been a couple of years, but obviously Nico, as you mentioned, could be the best of the bunch. And you brought up Jackson Arnold, who wasn't necessarily in kind of that tier of quarterbacks, at least it didn't feel like, but obviously highly touted quarterback in that class. Very much like Nico, a lot of anticipation, got a little taste of it last year. First year starting quarterback for Oklahoma, joining the SEC, hosting Tennessee in week 2. That matchup already has so many storylines because it's the first SEC game for them. It's Heupel going home, Bob Stoops lurking in the background. I mean, there's so much going on. But also, I think an underrated storyline is Nico versus Jackson Arnold in that quarterback matchup.
Absolutely. And honestly, that game is one of the biggest games on the schedule for both teams. And you look at some key games for Tennessee, I think, right? When you look at Oklahoma, NC State early in the season is a big game against a good defense. They have to play Kentucky as well. These are the types of games that are going to decide whether Tennessee makes the playoff or not. And the storyline of Iamaleava versus Arnold is going to be fascinating because Jackson Arnold, I'll be honest, he's got really a rebuilt supporting cast around him. They're kind of retooling this year. They lost some running backs in the portal. I believe their entire offensive line is brand new starters. Oklahoma's got a lot of rebuilding to do around Arnold if they want to be on that level of contention, whereas Iamaleava, they lost Jalen Wright and they lost, I believe, 2 offensive linemen, but you're returning just about your whole receiving core, and you're adding Chris Brazzell from from Tulane, who's a really, really good player. This is the type of build that you want, especially in Josh Heupel's offense, for a young quarterback to succeed in, and whatever he gives you in the running game as well. Because the one thing I noticed about Tennessee last year, I thought they could have run the ball with Joe Milton, actually more than they did. And the one time I saw them do it was in the first half against Alabama, and that might have been the best half of football they played all season, right? I think Nico can get really, really involved in the design run game and help this team out a lot as well.
You brought up the offensive line, and Tennessee did lose 2 starters. One, it was a 5th or 6th year graduation. The other transferred from Florida to Tennessee, now Tennessee to Kentucky, and Gerald Mincey. But Tennessee does bring in Lance Hurd, who is not a returning starter, but he was the highest rated signee in the class of 2023 for LSU. He was sitting behind last year one's going to be a top 10 pick in Will Campbell. The other, Emory Jones, probably a day 1 or day 2 pick. What do you like about Lance Hurd? I know you might not know an awful lot about him, but he certainly is an NFL prospect, and he's coming in to be a full-time starter this year, and then he'll be draft eligible next year.
For sure. I mean, you talk about LSU getting those big, powerful guys in there, right? Like Will Campbell and Emory Jones. And I think Hurd is in that same kind of boat, right? Where you talk about just big and powerful, and even Tennessee up front. People think obviously, their offense is all finesse and this and that. But when Tennessee's really rolling, they like to run the ball. They like to run power. They like to pull their guards. They like to mash people between the tackles. So I think Hurd can fit in on that, as he just has to get the experience, right? You mentioned it, just sitting behind 2 studs last year, and we'll see what he learned from them. But LSU really has a blueprint nowadays for what their tackles look like. They're big and they're strong, and they can run these gap schemes really, really well. And I think that fits Tennessee's run game very, very well.
Let's stay on the offensive side of the football for Tennessee before we flip it over and talk about a guy that you guys really love in James Pearce. The explosiveness at wide receiver. No more Jalen Hyatt, who's been gone for a couple years. Cedric Tillman's gone. Bayless Jones, was really, really good in this offense a couple years ago. Tennessee took a step back in terms of the explosives last year, and I think that has a lot to do with Joe Milton. I think it has a lot to do with the receivers, not just Joe Milton. But I think that's going to return this year with Nico, because Dante Thornton, the heralded transfer portal get from Oregon last year, did not have a good year. But I think he's had a great offseason. He was starting to come around last year when they bumped him to the outside before his season-ending injury. I think he's going to be much better this year. Of course, you bring back Brew McCoy, Squirrel White, Mike Matthews, a 5-star freshman. But Chris Brazzell is a guy you brought up from Tulane. Sure, he's going to step up and have a new realm and try to prove it in this league, but we've seen him do it already, and he's having a fantastic fall camp. What do you like about the skill set of Chris Brazzell?
I think it's exactly that. He fits right in with those vertical playmakers, right? When they were down at Tulane, you really had him getting vertical and Jaquan Jackson working in the slot, who's now with the Tennessee Titans. And he just gave them that element, right, of just downfield, just that downfield threat Tulane needed, right? Michael Pratt didn't have the biggest arm, but he knew how to get the ball to Chris Brazzell. And now you've got, again, a guy in Nico with supreme arm strength who can get it there. He was really the guy that opened things up for Tulane when you talk about, Mekhi Hughes running the ball. They wanted to run the ball a lot, whether it was with Mekhi Hughes or Michael Pratt or whoever. And Brazzell was the guy that kept safeties off of the top. Now he joins a whole group of guys that can do that. I think he fits in seamlessly. And the depth of this Tennessee wide receiver room, you're not asking Brazzell to come in here and get 1,500 yards. If he does, fantastic. But I think he fits right in with this group. I think he brings a very similar skill set. And again, it's the blueprint that Josh Heupel's looking for, right? You mentioned guys like Jalen Hyatt, right, where they want to get downfield. They want to run screens and they want to get vertical. And I think Brazzell is perfectly capable of doing both of those things.
I want to say about our friends over at Gametime. Gametime is an app to where you can buy tickets to the next big events in your area. It can be sporting events, it can be concerts, it can be comedy shows, it can be monster truck rallies, it can, whatever the case is in your area, you can buy tickets, from, here in Knoxville at Neyland Stadium, Lindsey Nelson, Thompson Bowling Green and Food City Center, the Bijou Theater, the Tennessee Theater, whatever it is, you can buy tickets to those events on the Gametime app. You can save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater in your area. Flash deals where you can save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or the event. Zone deals where you can save even more when you choose a section and let Gametime choose the seats. All-in prices where the toggling feature shows you the total up front with no surprise or hidden fees. Lowest price guarantee is the best one right now, where Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference if you find a cheaper ticket somewhere else. All that and more is on the Gametime app. Download the Gametime app today, create an account, put in the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account, safe, secure, easy to use, put in the promo code LOCKEDONCollege. LOCKEDONCOLLEGE, Locked On College. For $20 off, download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. James Pearce. Obviously he had a breakout year last year, double-digit sacks. I want to say you guys at Pro Football Focus were the ones that really started the jump on him this offseason, saying, hey, this guy can be not only a first-round pick, not only a top 10 pick or first defensive player. I mean, this guy's going to be flirting with the number 1 overall pick. What about James Pearce's game is great, and what are areas where he can get even better this year to solidify that top 10 and maybe top 5 draft slot?
So I think this goes into 3 categories, right? You've got the upside, which is just the absolute dynamite athleticism. And as a speed rusher, the explosiveness off the ball, the inside counter move that comes off of that, it's unmatched by any pass rusher in college football right now. He's the best pure speed rusher in college football. You could argue he's the best overall pass rusher in college football. We had him in our early mock draft back in April as the number 1 overall pick. He's just he's a rare athlete. And the kind of the thing I've been saying right now, I think his floor is Dallas Turner, and Dallas Turner went number 17 or 18 overall in this past draft. I think he's as good as Dallas Turner right this minute. Okay. I think the in-between on it is the fact that he's so good and he's not even fully polished yet. When you look at his game, when you look at his moves, when you look at sometimes, the leverage that he plays with, it's at probably a B or a B- level. He's not even all the way there yet when it comes to his fundamentals. He's just such a freakish athlete that he's winning anyway. And I think the downside is the fact that he's listed at 242 pounds, right? And that's a bit light for at least an NFL edge defender. He's probably never going to be like the best, most consistent run defender. And sometimes he can't win with power at that size. If he can keep his explosiveness with another 10 to 15 pounds on him in the future, he could be an elite pass rusher in the NFL. If he stays at that size, you're talking about guys comped more like a Bruce Irvin, right? Or even Dallas Turner, who was, I think, 247 when he came out in this year's draft. So is he just a speed rusher, or can he add just enough power and run defense to his game? Maybe get somewhere in the 250s where he can really round it off. But as an athlete and as a pure speed rusher, there's really nobody better in the country.
So for Pearce, what does he need to do this fall to not lose any stock? What does he need to do this fall to kind of maintain? I mean, yeah, it'd be great to gain some weight, but like he's not going to gain weight this fall when he's out there playing. So like, what does he need to do this year to maintain, I guess?
I think the obvious thing to see is just play with a bit better pad level, both in the pass and run game. Sometimes, he's not the biggest guy, but he still plays a little bit high, because sometimes what you see, guys with such athletic gifts like that, sometimes it's not the most attention to detail early on. They're just so good that they can win without it, right? But to me, it's pad level. Our own lead draft analyst, Trevor Sikkema, pointed this out to me, is his get off is incredibly explosive, and it could be even better. Like, there is more room to improve fundamentally all the way around just with his technique, right? So those are the things that can be tangible and can be worked on even in season during practice, right? But I think that's something I would look for as pad level coming out of his stance as a pass rusher, and then even defending the run when things are run right at him, especially. That's where teams are going to attack him, just because he's the big name guy. Certain big name guys like that, especially speed rushers off the edge, the counterpunch is to run right at them. We've seen this even with the Dallas Cowboys and Micah Parsons, right? Teams run right at Parsons because they're not afraid of him in the run game. Pearce has to play with better pad level and strength through that pad level to prove that he can defend that.
Open-ended question, and I know there are going to be several contenders here when you look at the quarterback position and obviously the edge rusher position, and maybe even a couple offensive tackles in there we already mentioned. Who is the biggest competition for James Pearce to be the number one overall draft pick, 9 months from now?
Oh, wow. Okay, so this is a great defensive draft. It's a grittier draft than it was last year. You can go with the obvious and say quarterback like Carson Beck or Shedeur Sanders, but the guys we've been looking at are Mason Graham, the defensive tackle from Michigan, who I think is the most slam dunk top 10 pick in the country. I think he's the safest pick in the country. There's Will Campbell from LSU, who you mentioned before, is probably the best tackle in the country. And honestly, we might have a contender for the first cornerback ever to be taken number one overall, and Will Johnson from Michigan. He is as good as any corner that we've tracked in his first 2 seasons in college in 10 years of doing this. So I think you got some real contenders at several different positions. I'll even throw in another edge rusher, Nick Scoreton from Texas A&M, who transferred in from Purdue. He's got a lot of Jared Verse to his game. He could be a guy. And actually, Trevor Sikkema, I believe, has him edge one on his board right now. So you've got some real contenders. I think it's some grittier positions. I think it's increasingly likely, unless we see a Carson Beck or a Shedeur Sanders have a Heisman-level year, that you will see a non-quarterback taken number one, and there's a lot of contenders.
Once upon a time, man, Jared Verse was very, very close to being a Tennessee Volunteer when he was in the transfer portal. Obviously went to Florida State. You stay on the Tennessee defensive side of the football. Who are some other prospects that obviously are not in the realm of James Pearce right now, but maybe in a couple of years could be, day 1, day 2 NFL draft picks? I think one that kind of jumps out to me, and I'm curious to see if you were thinking the same thing. Jermon McCoy, the cornerback, coming over from Oregon State, first year at Tennessee. He's going to be a day 1 starter. Track background, offensive background, still learning to play cornerback. I think he's going to be a guy that really explodes onto the scene for Tennessee, and then down the road, maybe the NFL.
Yeah, I agree. And you know what? That was the name that was jumping out at me because this Tennessee defense is really, really inexperienced, right? When you look at the only guy who was on last year's defense and is returning that played at least 400 snaps is James Pearce Jr., right? So it's a lot of inexperience. They lost some guys in the portal, both starting safeties, Tyler Brown. But no, I think Jermon McCoy is an interesting name because he's the one guy who really held up well in an Oregon State secondary that was kind of the weakest part of their team. Like you mentioned, a really good athlete can get after the football. And I think another interesting guy to me is another transfer. That's Jacoby Thomas from Middle Tennessee. Okay. Safety is going to be a big point of focus for this Tennessee team. You lost Tamarion McDonald in the portal. You lost Jalen McCullough. I forget if it was in the portal or to the NFL, but both starting safeties gone. Tennessee is probably going to be in a lot of shootouts, right? And your secondary is going to have to hold up. These two guys are the focus for me, but I totally agree with you. I think McCoy could definitely be a prospect in the 2025 draft.
What about Thomas is intriguing to you? There's a lot of unknowns there, obviously. I mean, he played a lot at MTSU. He's coming up right now in fall camp, trying to see the game slow down a little bit. I mean, he's going to play a ton. What about his game intrigues you in Jacoby Thomas?
Really just a well-rounded player, right? Does a little bit of everything, did a little bit of everything down there at Middle Tennessee. It's not the highest level football, right, when you talk about Conference USA, but there's still spread offenses down there. You're playing teams like Western Kentucky and things like that. I think it's just the jump in competition's obviously a factor, but just a really well-rounded player who can play the run and coverage very, very well.
Anybody else on Tennessee's team right now that you're intrigued to see how they perform this fall, the steps that they can take, and then obviously kind of maybe where they're going to be in the spring or this time next year? Anybody else we didn't really talk about that you're intrigued to watch on Tennessee's team this year?
I'm really curious just as a general focus. I don't know if there's one specific name or who it is that's going to jump out, but who is the guy that creates that threat opposite of Pearce, right? Because obviously last year it was Tyler Barron. I believe he had 8 or 9 sacks, one of the more underrated pass rushers in the SEC. But who is that guy? Is it a Dominic Bailey? Is it a Josh Josephs? I need a second threat, because one of the things I see here with the amount of inexperience and how young this defense is, right, is is James Pearce our only threat up front, right? Like, if we're just double and triple teaming him every play, can somebody else on the edge, or even an interior guy like Amari Thomas, somebody like that, who is that other pass rusher that's going to cause us problems, so we're not just constantly sliding protection over to James Pearce Jr. I think that's going to be a huge key to Tennessee season, is just finding a way on the defensive line to complement Pearce.
Yeah, the good thing about that defensive line, and Dalton, there's no way for you to know this because you're not on the every single day beat like I am, and a nerd, and keeping track of snap counts and all that. The defensive line across the board, very experienced, but they play 13 to 14 guys, so like the snap counts look low, and it doesn't look like a guy that's like a full-fledged starter. So like the defensive line, very experienced coming back, and that's going to help Pearce. But you're exactly right. Barron on the other side last year, I think he had 6.5 sacks. Tyree West, Tyree Weathersby, Jason Jenkins, Dominic Bailey, somebody's got to be that Robin to the Batman, because for it to work the way it did last year, you need both of them for sure. So I'm excited to see what it looks like this season as well. Dalton always does a great job over Pro Football Focus. What do you got coming up heading into the season? What can we look forward to, and where can we find your work?
So we've got the PFF College Football Show on YouTube, where we just finished recording all 7 team previews for all 70 Power 5 teams, and we're even going to do a group of 5 previews sometime. It's going to come out, I believe, sometime next week, of like the top 10 or 12 contenders. So there's that. Always on PFF.com. There's some great college football content there between Max Chadwick and myself and some other guys that we have doing it. I'm not sure when it's coming out, but I actually just ranked all 70 Power 5 quarterbacks, so that's something to tune into also. But yes.
Where's Nico? Where's Nico?
Right around. He was in the top 20. I had him top 20, even though he's only made one start, but the potential in this offense is big time.
Can't complain.
But yeah, no, I think what was I thinking? I lost it because Nico's so darn good. It's hard not to think about him. Like and subscribe to the PFF College Football Show. As always, we'll be doing game previews and other content all season long.
Dalton, great stuff, man. Thanks so much for joining the show.
Appreciate you big time. Thank you.
All right, so every season, or every offseason around this time, as we are entering ever so closely to the start of the football season, that time period, Bruce Feldman over at The Athletic, all right, he puts out his annual Freaks List. I think we had a question in the mailbag podcast a couple days ago, or a couple weeks ago maybe, about who are the freaks on this Tennessee team. Who were the strong weightlifters? Who were the fast guys? Who were the big guys that move? Who were the defensive tackles that move like wide receivers? You have a couple of those guys on everybody's team at this level, because you are not playing at this level without being just an absolute stud, right? And just defying, the reason of logic at points in time. So The Athletic and Bruce Feldman, they do this every single year. They put out their annual freaks list, where I believe they go all the way up to 100, the top 100 freaks in college football. And Tennessee had 2 representatives on the list. No surprise, the first one coming up at number 17. So a top 20 pick right here, and certainly that'll be the case next year in the NFL draft. And that is James Pearce Jr. This is what Bruce Feldman has to say about James Pearce Jr. as he checks in at number 17 on the Freaks list. Quote, the SEC's top returning pass rusher wasn't listed as one of the 10 fastest Vols in the EA Sports College Football 25 video game, but we would put him there after his dazzling display in the Citrus Bowl. Pearce clocked 23 miles per hour on a pick 6 against Iowa, turning him one of the fastest GPS measurements of any FBS play all season long. One of his coaches told me that the 6'5", 245-pound junior is a legitimate 4.4 40 threat. According to Pro Football Focus, Pearce was the SEC's highest graded defensive end last year with a grade of 90.9. He tied for the SEC lead in sacks with 10, was second in tackles for loss with 14.5. He's the SEC's returning statistical leader in both of those categories. He had 16 quarterback hurries, 2 pass breakups, and forced 2 fumbles in 2023. And of course, we just heard from Dalton Wasserman, one of Pro Football Focus's guys, about just how great James Pearce is. And, certainly he's set to be, having a really, really good season this year. So no surprise that James Pearce appears on this list, and I think it's a lot of those things that Dalton pointed out. He's still just kind of refining who he is. He's still just kind of figuring out, who he is and gaining strength. And if he can keep the explosiveness and keep the quick twitch and keep the speed off the edge while putting on 15 to, in a perfect world, 20 pounds, boy, he could really, really be a dynamic force at the next level. Max Chadwick earlier in the offseason wrote this: Pearce is one of the most fearsome pass rushers in the country as a sophomore. His 92.4 PFF pass rushing grade and 21.3% pressure rate ranked third among FBS edge defenders. The scary part about those numbers is that he was winning almost exclusively off his athleticism last year, meaning he can become nearly unblockable with some added pass rushing moves. I'm thrilled to see if he's added any pass rushing moves into his repertoire, because you're right. And we talked about this last year during the season. Pearce still growing, still developing. There's so much more he can add. He's literally just winning off speed and athleticism alone, just as I read right there from Max Chadwick. And just like we talked about with Dalton in the previous segment. I'm excited to see what he can be this year. He's certainly going to be one of the top freaks in all of college football. So James Pearce Jr. checked in at number 17, according to Bruce Feldman of The Athletic. And on the way down there, we get over the midway point. We'll go to number 59, and it's Squirrel White. I was just talking to somebody again a moment ago, or a couple of days ago. It's like Squirrel White continues to weigh 160 pounds, okay? And he continues to start at the slot receiver in the Southeastern Conference and Power 4 football. He very easily could be the all-time leading receptions getter for Tennessee football when his career is all said and done if he stays healthy. He's a freak. I mean, again, 160 some odd pounds. Let's see what the Tennessee roster actually has him listed as. Okay, this should be interesting. Squirrel White, what number is he this year? 3? They all changed the numbers. They change the numbers every single year. Number 3, 167 pounds. I guarantee you, a week into camp, he's at 160. Okay, 160 pound, 5'10". Let's see, they have him listed at 5'10". 5'10", 160 pounds doesn't cut it in the SEC. So the fact that Squirrel White not only plays, but is great, really, really good for Tennessee football just defies logic. And that's why he's on this list. This is what Bruce Feldman has to say about Squirrel White. Quote, the 5'10", 165-pound junior, number 64 on our list in 2023, so he moved up 5 spots, is one of the fastest players in the game. White has been clocked at 23.4 miles per hour and has a 40.6-inch vertical leap. He has run a 1.50-second 10-yard split. Last year, White had 67 catches for 803 yards and averaged 12 yards per catch. For his career, he has 9 catches of 40-plus yards, 6 catches of 50-plus yards, and 3 receptions for 60-plus yards. Again, that shouldn't happen for a guy with small stature such as Squirrel White. But hey, I am glad that he is on my team. So I figured Elijah Simmons should be on this list again, but Elijah Simmons doesn't necessarily have the stats to kind of back up. He's appeared on this list a couple of times earlier on in his career. Remember, he's an extra year player now. He's either 5th or 6th year. I can't remember at this point, but he's been here a minute. Elijah Simmons will forever be on this list for me because he's having a really, really good fall camp. His weight is managed really, really well right now, but he's still about 340, okay? And he moves, he's quick, he's explosive. He's really, really good in that regard. Also, he's a great singer. He's a freak all around, all right, in a good way. I think Elijah Simmons should be on this list for sure, but he's not. Another one that I want to highlight, and Tennessee fans don't really care about this, but I'm a Carson Newman alum, and I'm a Carson Newman former football player, so I'm 100% going to draw attention to this. Major Williams, Carson Newman defensive back, comes in at number 74. This is what they have to say about Major Williams. A Virginia transfer, Williams had 53 tackles last year, 10 TFLs, 5 PBUs, and an interception for Division II program in Tennessee. He is the leader of our team, and our program was unanimously voted on as team captain, said Carson Newman new head coach Ashley Ingram, who spent 16 years as an assistant at Navy coaching the offensive line. The 6-foot, 195-pounder's measurables add to his stock as an NFL prospect. This offseason, he ran a 4.38-second 40-yard dash, clocking a flying 10-yard time of 0.89 seconds, vertical jumped 38.2 inches, and had a top speed of 23.65 miles per hour on the GPS. Williams squatted 550 pounds, power clean 315 pounds, and bench 340 pounds. Man, that's ridiculous. I mean, the miles per hour and speed is, what we just talked about with James Pearce, what we just talked about with Squirrel White. The thing that's impressive with me about Major Williams here, not a Tennessee football player, and I know you guys don't care, but I'm just going to continue to brag on the homeschool here. Squatting 550 pounds, power cleaning 315 pounds, that is a lot of weight. That is a lot of weight to power clean. Man. Benching 340 pounds as a defensive back, Major Williams, he's going to be an NFL draft pick, and he's coming from Carson Newman. So anyway, wanted to give shout out to that, but also two Tennessee Volunteers appearing on the Freaks list ahead of the 2024 season. That's one of my favorite lists to check out every single year. It means we are just about there. It is just about time for football here in Tennessee. We'll continue to look at fall camp. We'll try to catch up with Josh Ward at some point this week. Conflicting schedules didn't allow for a Ward Wednesday hit this week, but we'll continue to get you ready for the first scrimmage of fall camp that's coming up Friday night at Neyland Stadium. Still plenty more to talk about. We'll get into it on tomorrow's show. Thanks so much. Making Locked On Vols your first listen. Check out Locked On SEC. Check out Locked On College Football on the way out. Until then, until tomorrow, enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. This is Locked On Vols.